All right, so continuing on with Chapter 12, let's go into Learning Objective 2 and talk about the ways in which we account for these types of intangible assets. Now, some people get confused by this. Yes, there's essentially 5 major categories of or types of intangible assets, but there are 6 ways we can account for them based on the purpose or what function the intangible asset holds for the company overall. Is the intangible asset a marketing related or customer related? One example of a customer related might be, say, for instance, customer lists. Kevin, swear to God, not now. Customer lists are like one of those things we are customer related. We'll talk about these in more detail here. Customer lists, that's a big one, especially if a company is a small company that sells, um, mom and dad retire, they want to sell their business. Hey, they have a client list they've developed over the past 30, 40 years. That becomes a major negotiation point for a lot of small businesses when they sell their company to somebody else. Artistic related, contract related. We'll talk about some of the bigger ones, technology related. When I say technology, I don't necessarily mean computer components or silicon chips. I mean technology, a new way of doing things. And then, as we talked about before, there's also goodwill. Goodwill has its own sort of little nuance we have to deal with. So we're going to go through some of these in detail here, just really quickly, though. Marketing related. Examples are trademarks. Or trade names, newspaper mastheads, internet domains, etc., etc. Trademarks in the U.S. Generally offer indefinite legal protection. However, you must renew the trademark with the U.S. Patent Office. I believe it's the U.S. Patent and Copyright Office every 10 years. Okay, so it's indefinite. You just need to file a piece of paperwork that says, hey, this is us, we're still want to keep it going. But it'll keep going on and on and on and on. You capitalize the acquisition cost. There's no amortization if you renew regularly. Why is there no amortization? Because there's no end of life. This will not die unless we tell it to. Once it dies, then we go ahead and just expense it all and say, oops, forgot to renew, expense the whole thing. Next one, customer related examples. Big one, like I told you before, customer lists. Customer lists. Customer lists, the customer orders or customer production backlogs, contractual and non-contractual customer relationships. This is one where we don't necessarily have an exclusive agreement to produce for a customer. They're just customers that we are a supplier among many that, say, provides rubber bands or something, right? So we may not be the only company in town that just sells these types of goods or supplies. Therefore, we have customers that come back to us maybe on a frequent basis, but we don't have an exclusive contract with them. Contractual relationships, those are the types of customer-related intangible assets that can be more easily quantifiable, because according to the contract itself, there will be some sort of requirement for how long the relationship will last. For instance, a non-contractual customer, you don't know, as soon as the company sells to another bigger company, those customers may decide to say, screw it, I'm leaving. I'm going to go to somebody else, right? A contractual based customer is more guaranteed. That's something that can be more easily quantified in the negotiation process. Capitalize the acquisition costs and amortize it over the expected useful life. There has to be some sort of estimation about how long we can have our customers stick around with us even after we sell the business. Next one is artistic, right? You're probably used to these kinds of things, artists, music artists, painters, etc., etc. These types of assets, intangible assets, are usually protected under copyright laws. So copyrights on plays, literary works, musical works, etc. Copyright is granted for the life of the creator plus 70 years. So as long as I'm alive and I have a copyright over my music, right? Or perhaps some type of video or something I produce that is considered artistic in nature, right? That cannot be replicated or used without my permission so long as I'm alive. And even if I, say, spontaneously combust, right? Maybe I inject too much disinfectant, or somehow I ingest some UV lights and I pass away, I still get 70 years of protection. And that 70 years is really for the benefit of my family over the long term. I may pass away, but hey, as long as the royalty checks are still coming in, my family will be well taken care of. But when you think about it, if you want to kind of keep in mind, keep these sort of dates straight in your head, think about copyrights as like a bad prison sentence. Okay, capitalizing cost of acquiring and defending, and we'll talk about that more later. And we amortize over the useful life. So that's going to be more about expectation. Am I going to last till I'm 70, 80, 100? Probably not the rate I'm drinking beer, but usually you have actuaries that work for insurance companies that determine essentially what is the useful life. So you think about today until I die, and then you add 70 years on top of that, right? That's how you determine the overall useful life of those things. Contract related intangible assets. A big one is that you see most often is a franchise. Franchise and licensing agreements, construction permits, etc., etc. A franchise or a license with a limited life should be amortized over that life of the franchise, or less. If the useful life is less than the legal life, use the smaller. Always go with the smaller. The smaller is usually what the useful life is. Franchise with indefinite life should be carried at cost and not amortized. Okay, so in the case where we do have a franchise and it's expected to go on indefinitely, we consider that franchisee a going concern. If for whatever reason that franchisee is likely to go out of business because of, say, some sort of downturn in the economy because of a pandemic, then you really have to worry about perhaps expensing this or writing off a loss due to an impairment. All right, now let's talk about the biggest one here, technology related intangible assets. Okay, again, when you think technology, yeah, it might involve computers or some type of high tech, right? Some type of silicon chip or transistor, right? But think about technology as can be as simple as like a block and tackle system of raising or lowering something. If you don't know what block and tackle is, I encourage you to Google it. It's fascinating how physics works when you use a block and tackle. But a block and tackle system does not involve any electronic components. Okay, so when you think about technology, sometimes it means just using a bigger hammer, for instance. Okay, so when you have a better way of doing things, or you have invented something that you might find you can sell, or there's going to be some sort of use for it out in the real world, you're going to want to file for a patent. So patented technology and trade secrets. Hush, loose lips, sink ships. Granted by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Okay, if you want to look up what the different types of patents are, you can go to the government website. A patent gives the holder exclusive use or protection for 20 years. Okay. So when you think about patents, think about, oh, the protection is 20 years, or patents have a protection like a good Scotch whiskey, right? You want to hold off on drinking Scotch for as long as you can. So some people find that makes the flavor meld better. Sometimes, and by the way, as a side note, this is one of the reasons why winemakers, they usually wait 2 years and leave the wine in barrels before they actually sell it. And actually, brewers do that too. I know from home brewing that I left beer in kegs for upwards of 6 months, and it just tastes better, right? Just lets the flavors kind of meld. So 20 years, like a good Scotch whiskey, patented protection, right? Capitalize the cost of purchasing a patent, filing fees in general. We can also buy patents from our competitors or from just somebody who does nothing but invent stuff and file for patents. We want to amortize the patent over the legal life or the useful life. whichever one is shorter. Okay. Shorter one tends to be the useful life. And in general, when we say, well, if I have 20 years protection, why would I actually expense it in over a shorter period of time? Keep in mind that if we have, say, like $100,000 that that we've essentially capitalized, the question comes down to this: if we expense it over, say, a 20-year period, okay, it's going to be very little amortization expense. But if we expense it over a shorter period, say like 10 years, there's going to be a lot of amortization expense each year. So a lot of people, there's a incentive for a lot of companies to go with a longer life because it reduces the amount of amortization expense, right? You're spreading 100,000 thinly over a longer piece of bread. Or use the shorter life. Spread 100,000 over a shorter piece of bread, which means you're going to have a thicker amount of expense, amortization expense every year. The FASB says choose the shorter. Okay. Now, from a tax perspective, taxes have their own rules. Okay, but the FASB generally says if you reasonably expect to get protection for about 10 years, then use 10 years. Yeah, you might have some copycats come out there and produce something that's very similar. You can sue them and you can win in court. But at some point, you have to realize that corporations, even if it's somewhere in this period right here, if there's a competitor out there who's duplicating our technology, they're coming out with their own smartphone, their own iPad or touchpad. Is it worth even suing these people? Because maybe our patent's going to be expired in a couple years anyways. If we're going to be caught up in the legal system for 5 years, it's probably not worth it. So usually companies will tend to, for practical reasons, shorten the useful life because they know at some point it's not worth suing people who copy us. We want to expense. This is a key feature here. We want to expense any research and development costs that were incurred in developing the product or the technology. And it says developing a patent. It's the patented technology that we're trying to protect, right? So if we come up with a new product or a new way of doing things, the process in discovering that new technology, that cannot be capitalized. It's only when we discover, have an aha moment, we have officially created a prototype. This is going to go into production as soon as we file for a patent. At that point, when we get that aha, we found something going forward, then we're talking about capitalizing legal fees and filing fees. Okay, but everything before that time period, you just have to go ahead and expense. It kind of sucks, but that's just the way the FASB prefers it. So let's go into an example next. On September 1st, and again, remember dates, pay close attention to the dates. Okay? Beerbo pays $120,000 to purchase a patent. Okay, so someone else's patent has some protection. Patent's legal life is 20 years. We bought it for $120,000, but we expect that we'll only have some protection for about 10 years. So here we are in a timeline. I always recommend when you're given dates, draw a timeline. Saves you a lot of frustration. So we got September 1st here, and we got December 31st of 2019, the first year. Okay, assume that Beerbo has a 12/31 year end, unless I tell you otherwise. Okay, so the question comes down to this: if we buy it on September 1st, what would the journal entry be? So down below, we would go ahead and we would debit the patent account, which is going to be a long-term asset. It's going to be an intangible asset for $120,000, and go ahead and just credit cash. We bought it for cash. Current asset, $120,000. Okay. Now, logical question: what happens 3 months from now when the end of 2019 approaches? Well, we're probably going to have some sort of amortization, not depreciation, amortization. What does that involve? Well, it's a similar process that we've seen before when we looked at tangible assets like equipment. Okay, in this case, we have a cost, $120,000, right? Doesn't say anything about a salvage value or residual values. Just assume zero residual value. Okay, so the overall amortizable base is $120,000. Now, over how many years are we going to amortize this? We're always going to use years because legal rights are basically consumed in a yearly pattern. So we're going to have overall expected 10 years, 10 years useful life. We may have more than that legally, but we have to use the shorter of the useful life or the legal life. That being the case, every year we're going to amortize $12,000. Amortization, I can spell amortization. Come on, Kevin. Amortization per year. Be careful here. Yes, it's $12,000 per year amortization, but we've only consumed in the current year, essentially, September, October, November, December, 4 months. So you want to multiply this by 4/12. God help you if you rush doing these problems. Don't be in a haste to get this done. So that's the percentage of 2019 that this thing was outstanding. And so when we multiply those together, what do we get? $4,000 amortization. Okay. So we're just taking the annual amortization and multiplying it by the fraction of the year in which it was outstanding, 4/12. So down below, we can go ahead and debit amortization expense. That's going to be on the income statement, okay, but only to the extent of 4,000, 4 months worth. Okay. And what do we credit? Okay, you could credit accumulated amortization. I say most companies don't, so don't do it. Just directly reduce the patent itself. Patent, long-term asset, $4,000. Okay, that's year. What about the next year? So here we are now. It's roughly here. We're talking about January. Go ahead and say January 1 of 2020. Last year's done. And we're going to go to December 31st, right? And you already know the answer to this. 1 full year, that's 12/12 times $12,000, right? Amortization per year. So we're going to have the full 12,000 amortization expense at the end of 2020. So down below, year 2, debit amortization expense on the income statement for the full 12,000. Credit directly to the patent account. Time has gone by. It now has less value to the tune of 1 year's worth, or $12,000. Okay? Hopefully that seems pretty straightforward because we're using the straight line method. Here's the tricky part, though. Beerbo incurs on January 1st, 2021. Beerbo incurs $180,000 in legal costs to successfully defend its patent. Okay. Now, ordinarily, legal fees, you expense them. Okay. But in this case, it's to protect the value of some asset. So in a lot of ways, if we successfully defend the patent, we essentially have augmented its value. Okay. So what do we do with $180,000 in legal costs on January 1st, 2021? We can go ahead and capitalize those. We don't have to expense $180,000 if we've successfully defended the patents. So on January 1st, 2021, so here we are, January 1, don't worry about these guys. January 1st, 2021, we defend the patent. Okay, so down below, January 1st, debit patent itself, bump up the value for $180,000. Okay. Credit cash. Someone asked me, what if we don't successfully defend it? You usually just expense the legal fees, but I'm not going to have you worry about that. If we successfully defend a patent, go ahead and capitalize it as so. But here's the tricky part now. If we've bumped up the value of the patent, right, now we have to figure out a new amortization per year. So let's go back up above. We had $120,000 as the original cost. We amortize $4,000 in 2019, and we amortize another $12,000 in 2020. So the net book value at the beginning of 2021 is $104,000. That's net book value at 1/1/21. Okay, we're going to add to the overall net book value. So let's look over here. 104,000. It's the net book value on January 1st, 2021. We are capitalizing another 180,000 in legal fees. Oops, I cannot spell. Legal fees. That was on January 1st. And that gets us to a new net book value, 284. That's the new net book value. New as of 1/1/2021. So, do we continue to amortize over the remaining useful life? Well, we anticipated it was going to go, say, the full 10 years, starting from September 2019, plus 10 years. Now, up above, we have to ask ourselves, what is the new revised life? We've just been sued. Maybe it's going to be harder to defend this, so let's maybe perhaps shrink down the useful life. Useful life has been revised to end 4 years from now, so December 31st, 2024. So we can say, okay, that's essentially 4 full years. So let's divide 285 by 4 years remaining. And when we do, we come up with a new amortization per year of $71,000. That's an amortization per year new. And that's what we have to use. So be very careful when you're working on these problems. And for exam purposes, be very careful. We're going to come up with a new amortization expense on the income statement for $71,000. Why is it bigger? 2 reasons. One, we capitalize more into the overall net book value. Net book value has gotten bigger. We're going to have more amortization expense. But we also shrunk the useful life down. So that sort of makes that big 284 now spread over a thinner piece of bread. And credit the patent account LTA directly $71,000. And that's all I really want you to worry about when it comes to doing the amortization. We're using straight line basis. The only little quirky part about that is be careful of the dates. You may have to do a partial year's worth of amortization, and also be aware of any new capitalized costs that change the amount that we depreciate over the years till the end of its useful life.